also disconnected, anxious, lonely. Lack of humility leads to problems in our closest relationships. It is also a problem between nations, within societies. Who in the Middle East, who between Ukraine and Russia, who in the American presidential election is ever likely to say, I don't know, I'm sorry? National pride seems to depend on never being wrong, and in our corporate and institutional lives, there's a whole industry of publicists, reputation managers and lawyers to help keep self-righteousness intact. It's never much. I just think what a difference it would have made if the post office bosses or the heads of Kijupski or the ministers responsible had been able to say, I don't know, to questions about the software. It might have made for a better investigation, and an earlier, more sincere expression of I'm sorry might have prevented the cruel mistreatment of those who were innocent all along. The current apologies are just too little and too late. And then frankly, where there is justice and reparation, it's good to express gratitude. When faults are admitted, owned and repented of, gratitude seals the deal. Another example of humility. Perhaps we should speak up for humility. It can't easily do it for itself. Actually, and to illustrate his point, I'm sorry if I've remembered Conor Moses' thought wrong. I don't exactly know what he said 50 years ago, but frankly, to anyone who does. His point remains, though. These little phrases capture our pride and enable the flow of human communication. They may just be the most important things we ever say.
That was Talk of the Day with Angela Temple. Let's have a look, knowing the history. This evening, over a remote patch of the South Pacific, a fireball will crash into the ocean and sink toward the water of Libya. The Peregrine spacecraft, whose launch we covered live last week on this program, was due to be the first commercial craft to land on the moon. It carried extraordinary feats of engineering and ingenuity on board, but it was in trouble almost as soon as a fuel leak in the propellant tank scuttled the mission. Science is a catalogue of experimentation, always involving cost and risk. What then can we learn from this experiment, which signals the start of a new era in which companies, rather than countries, are increasingly leading the race to space? Sean Cleaver is industrial manager at Airbus, who's working on another major space project, that's NASA's Orion space program, which is going to take humans further than they've ever gone before. We speak to her at the moment, and just before that, Professor Catherine Hayman, who's Scotland's astronomer for the morning to you both. Professor Hayman, if I could start with you, this is a huge disappointment, isn't it?
Yes, good morning, Al. It's going to be a huge loss for the scientific experiments on board. NASA had 5 experiments there that were going to look for water molecules on the surface of the moon. Mexico had their first experiments going to the moon, 5 small autonomous rovers that were going to be looking on the surface of the moon. So it is a loss, but Peregrine will be returning to Earth about 9 o'clock tonight, and hopefully it won't be coming in as a jar not going into the sea. Hopefully it can maybe burn up in the atmosphere, even though it's about the size of a shot.
I misunderstood exactly where the fibre was going to run out of fire. We'll come back to some of the implications of this commercial race in a moment if I may. Professor Hayes. First, Sean Cleaver, though it's very disappointing how Peregrine ended up, in scientists, the engineers will still have learned much from this mission, won't they?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, space exploration is a learning game, especially at this stage. We're learning a lot. And I think actually we shouldn't look at this as a failure. I mean, we should look at this as an incredible engineering success. At one point it was looking like this mission was doomed. But a team of engineers and scientists managed to work together and to problem solve and to actually, restore some capabilities of the spacecraft and ultimately direct it back to Earth. And they will this evening manage to safely dispose of that in the atmosphere. So I think that's actually quite impressive, and there's a lot that we can take away from that. But ultimately, I mean, space travel is difficult, and we're seeing that here.
Yeah, and just give us your sense, Sean, of the way in which space travel, the difficulties associated with it, have changed because it's now increasingly a commercial enterprise. We do need these commercial companies, and there is a potential huge upside, which is that commercial companies carry the risk and the financial burden.
Yes, absolutely. So this time round, we're going back to the moon, as a lot of people are aware, with the Artemis missions. But Artemis is a little bit different to how we did things in the past. I mean, it was NASA doing the Apollo missions previously. Now Artemis is all about collaboration. On the one side, you've got NASA-led programs in a bit more of a traditional sense, taking the astronauts to the moon, but the whole Artemis program also relies on the support infrastructure provided by other commercial companies, which is what we're seeing here. So I think we've all recognised now that it's difficult to go to the moon. It's expensive, it's challenging, and we need to unite both the traditional space agencies and nations together with these commercial companies to be able to do the impressive things that we want to do in the coming decades.
Yes, Professor Haymans, I know that you're a sciences specialist rather than economics or psychology, but why do you think so many companies are willing to incur these enormous costs? Is it partly the vanity of billionaires? Is it the hope of a financial return?
Well, I mean, what potentially is five of them. So we have a outer space treaty that restricts people from claiming territory, but there's nothing about mining. In principle, there are lots of precious metals on the moon that could be essential for, your smartphone and things like that. So there is commercial interest in going there. Controversially, the program also contains human remains that are going to the moon. So there's another sort of human aspect there, which makes scientists feel somewhat uncomfortable, but it's something that maybe we have to embrace if we want to benefit from the cheaper costs of launching these scientific experiments by collaborating with the commercial sector.
I mean, you worry, Catherine, that the transition to this more commercial rather than national or commercial space race, what we have is, a bit like the internet has been for a while, a new, largely ungoverned or unregulated frontier where the rules are mostly set by very rich people who have their own priorities.
Yeah, I think this is definitely an issue. We don't have a good legal framework for space, and internationally we need to discuss this and do it quickly because the commercial sector is moving much faster than international law can cope. There's also the risk factor. Musk is famous for saying if things aren't failing, you're not innovating enough, which is the complete opposite from the national space agencies where missions do not fail. So it's a new world, but it's one that we are willing to embrace because it allows us to do even more science.
Professor Catherine Haymans and Charlotte Weaver, thank you both very much. It is now 3 minutes to 8. Start the weather.
Hello there. It's cold out there once again, but this is the last bit of the cold day, something a little bit less cold and light tomorrow. And as we head into the weekend, unfortunately, the forest today is it's going to turn increasingly wet again and windy at times, gales or severe gales this weekend. But for the here and now, the worst of the weather once again across the Isle of Scotland. Blizzard conditions here, gusts of wind in excess of 50 miles an hour. And yes, there are some snow showers, frequent actual snow showers at the moment, but most from Scotland. Elsewhere, it's dry and we will get some sunshine coming through. A few scattered showers into Northern Ireland as well. A few wintry showers across parts of West Wales and also through East England. But anywhere inland, yes, it's cold. Yes, there's a widespread hard frost, but there'll be lighter winds and there'll be more sunshine coming through. So gradually, those temperatures are going to pick up. With a couple of extra layers, it'll be a pleasant day with that winter sunshine. 2 to 5 degrees across England and Wales, 3 degrees into Northern Ireland. For Scotland, it's the wind that's the factor. Blizzard conditions, gusty winds. Your thermometer might just say 0 to 1 degrees, but you'll feel it well below freezing. Overnight tonight, a little less cold, particularly from the west. And then as we go into tomorrow, there will be a frost around. Temperatures still going to start off around -4 degrees. And we'll gradually see it slowly clouding over from the west, and with wind direction changing to the west, some of those showers will be a little less wintry in the far east of Scotland. That's it. We'll be doing Record Warm.
Louise, thank you.
This is the story of a powerful Nigerian televangelist.
He was a huge celebrity and had a way of presenting himself as man of God.
He attracted followers to his church from around the globe.
It was like going to heaven. They had to stay.
But once there, some say that Chief Joshua used his power to control, manipulate, and abuse. This is God of Secrets, Season 2, The Disciples.
We all thought we were in heaven, but we were in hell, and in hell, terrible things happen.
Listen on BBC Sounds.
Coming up in the next now, we're going to hear from a man with relatives still stuck in Gaza and why his wife calls Israel's actions genocide, but he does not. As the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, we'll also hear from one of the Lords who's going to fight the government over its Rwanda bill. You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Nick Robertson, Glasgow, and Amol Raji. It's 8 o'clock on Wednesday, the 17th of January. The headlines this morning. The Prime Minister will speak from Downing Street about his Rwanda policy this morning after seeing off a potential revolt from Conservative MPs. Northern Ireland is facing what has been described by unions as the biggest strike in a generation, involving tens of thousands of public sector workers. Pakistan has carried out airstrikes inside Iran 2 days after cross-border attacks by the Iranians. An American company's malfunctioning moon lander is heading back towards Earth at firing destruction in the atmosphere. BBC News is read by Caroline Nichols.
Downing Street has called the passage of the Rwanda bill a major step in the government's plan to stop migrant boats crossing the Channel. The legislation to revive the scheme to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda cleared its main Commons hurdle last night with a majority of 44, and just 11 Conservative MPs rebelled. Ministers have urged the House of Lords to get on and pass it into law, but peers are likely to try to change it and send it back. Labour dismissed the scheme as a costly con. Political editor Chris Wilson reports.
The government's Rwanda plan lives on. The story of this week is this. Around 60 Conservative MPs have major reservations with it, which boil down to a central concern. They fear it probably won't work. But the vast majority of those 60 in the end thought sticking with a plan that might just work was better than junking it, and in their view, guaranteeing it won't. Among the 11 rebels who did vote to junk it and said they had their own plan that would work, 3 recent former senior ministers, Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick and Cecilia Clark. Suella Braverman's verdict was blunt. They could not vote for yet another law destined to fail. The British people deserve honesty, and so I voted against, she said. But, after another bruising bout of Tory psychodrama, Rishi Sunak's plan is alive, and from Downing Street's perspective, it is much better than the alternative. But the real prize for the Prime Minister is demonstrably proving that policy is actually delivering, and we are still some distance from that.
The Prime Minister will speak from Downing Street about his Rwanda policy later this morning. The Immigration Minister, Tom Carswell, told the BBC he hoped the bill wouldn't be held up in the Lords.
It's really important that the bill has gone to the House of Lords with a significant majority, having had very considerable scrutiny on the floor of the House of Commons, particularly over the last couple of days. It's gone up unamended, and I really hope that the House of Lords will now get on, consider this bill, and get it passed into law so that we can operationalise this plan and ultimately save lives.
Nurses, teachers and civil servants, along with tens of thousands of new public sector workers, are expected to go on strike in Northern Ireland this morning. And trade unions are calling the biggest walkout for a generation. 16 unions are involved in the dispute over pay and conditions. The UK government says it will not release the funds for wage rises until the Northern Ireland Assembly is back up and running. Here's our Ireland correspondent, Sarah Brown.
Across Northern Ireland, schools are closed. Public transport isn't running. The health service will be significantly reduced, and despite the cold snap, many roads will remain unwedded. Among the thousands joining today's action is Abigail Davies Phillips, a classroom assistant for children with special educational needs. She did the same job in England but was paid much less in Northern Ireland, where a pay deal hasn't yet been awarded.
The pay rises by comparison in England are here, the pay rise has been lower in Northern Ireland, and the pay rate in itself has been lower and is lower. I'd like to see just equity across the nation.
Northern Ireland's devolved government hasn't been functioning since 2022 after the Democratic Unionist Party withdrew in protest at post-Brexit trading arrangements. In December, the government offered a £3.3 billion financial package for Northern Ireland, including nearly £600 million to settle the public sector pay disputes, but it will release the money only for student returns. There's currently no sign of that happening.
The United States has carried out another round of strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. The operation came after the group attacked a US-owned cargo ship. From Washington, Neil Vernon reports.
This is now the 4th round of strikes on Yemen in the last week. The US military said its forces targeted 14 Houthi missiles that were loaded and ready to be launched. The latest strikes came shortly after an American-owned commercial vessel was hit by a drone fired from Houthi-controlled territory. That ship was damaged, but remained seaworthy, according to the US military. Meanwhile, the White House has said the Houthi group would be redesignated as a terrorist organization by the US in response to their reckless and indiscriminate attacks on shipping. The aim is to put pressure on them and impose sanctions against its supporters. But despite this, and the US strikes against their territory, the Houthis continue to launch attacks in the Red Sea.
Pakistan has carried out airstrikes on Iran 2 days after cross-border attacks by the Iranians. Both sides say they're targeting militant groups. Iranian state media is reporting that at least 3 women and 4 children have been killed in explosions in the country's southeast border region. Pakistan's Prime Minister is cutting short his visit to the World Economic Forum in Davos. China has offered to mediate. From Islamabad is our Pakistan correspondent, Caroline Davis.
This is yet another escalation between two neighbouring countries who until days ago had cordial relations. Pakistan's foreign ministry confirmed this morning that its strikes inside Iran have killed a number of what it calls terrorists. Pakistan said that while it fully respects the territorial integrity of Iran, its own security and national interests are paramount and cannot be compromised. The statement mirrors the language used yesterday by Iran's foreign minister, who confirmed that Iran had attacked militant groups inside Pakistan's borders. Pakistan ends its statement saying that it considers Iran a brotherly country, but the previously friendly relations between the two countries are severely fraying. There is no word yet on how Iran will respond.
The consumer group Which says its research suggests people can pay significantly more for train tickets at station vending machines in England compared with those bought online. Check the prices of 75 different journeys. Cheapest same-day tickets on the machines cost 52% more on average than on the Trainline website. Train companies said they'd continue to work with the government and the rail industry to achieve further changes to fares that would benefit customers. The Which travel editor, Roy Bolland, says the problem should be simple to fix.
This is not a problem that is specific to an individual operator, it's an industry-wide problem. And simply what needs to happen is operators are intent on closing ticket offices where you would be able to get payment tickets, is that they need to update their machines.
New figures show that the sale of electric vehicles in Europe rose by 37% last year, and over diesels for the first time. The European Automobile Manufacturers Association said EVs accounted for almost 15% of all new car sales in 2023. A report of the Constitutional Future of Wales says independence would be a viable option, but will bring significant challenges. An independent commission, co-chaired by the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, has concluded that urgent change is needed to protect Welsh devolution from collapse. North Wales correspondent Carl Griffin.
Over the last quarter of a century, the lawmaking powers of what's now the Welsh Parliament have grown slowly without any real resolution on how far devolution should go. While politicians have had a play with decisions on health, education and housing, they don't have control over issues like justice, foreign affairs or most taxes. The Independent Commission established to look at Wales's future has concluded the current system is unstable and change is needed. Sets out 3 options: either full independence, a federal UK where each of the 4 nations are equal, or an enhanced devolution deal. More powers handed down to Wales. Which, if any of those options is pursued, comes down to political will, and each needing the support of the UK government to become a reality.
The US company is hoping to put a lander on the moon will bring it home to destruction in the coming hours after its under fuel week. Expertise Astrobiologics said its Peregrine spacecraft will be directed to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and burn up. Here's our science correspondent, John Amos.
Astronautics Peregrine lander was in trouble almost as soon as it launched. A breach in a propellant tank made the spacecraft difficult to control. It certainly ruled out any attempt at a lunar landing. The 10 days since have been spent testing the spaceworthiness of other systems, including a suite of NASA scientific instruments. Engineers don't want to leave debris in orbit. They will now command Peregrine to make a fiery plunge into the Earth's atmosphere, somewhere over the Pacific, far from any population. The craft was hoping to make the first ever landing on the approved by a private company. Achievement of this one will have to wait a little longer.
Tennis, Stan Norrie has reached the third round of the Australian Open after a 5-set win over the Italian qualifier, Giulio Zaccheri. It's been round after losing the first 2 sets and will face the 11th seed, Casper Ruud, next. Norrie has had a progress in the third round on Melbourne.
Thank you, Caroline. It's coming up to 10 past 8. Well won in the parliamentary battle over the Rwanda scheme to deport asylum seekers goes to Rishi Sunak. The Tory rebellion in the Commons fizzed and then it fizzled with just 11 Conservative backbenchers voting against his bill. But if you think it's all over, think again. That number included the architects of the Rwanda policy until just a few short weeks ago. The former Home Secretary Suella Braverman and the former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, and more than 5 times that number have rebelled in earlier votes, including the man who is, if you like, the red ball made fresh, former Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson. Stand by now for round 2, which is much likely to go the Prime Minister's way. The bill moves to the House of Lords, where the loudest critics are likely to come from the other side of the debate. Rishi Sunak is holding a news conference today, which will no doubt call on them to respect the decisions of the elected chamber, and to let him try at least again to deliver that oft-repeated promise to stop debates. That, though, will not silence critics in the law to believe the Rwanda scheme isn't just impractical, it isn't just immoral, it is, they say, against international law. One of the leading critics is Lord Carlisle, a crossbench peer and former reviewer of terror legislation. I asked him how fellow peers were likely to treat the bill.
Well, the role of the House of Lords is not to thwart the government. Its role is to devise legislation and to protect the public from abuses of legal correctness and principle by the government. And I think many of us in the House of Lords believe that is exactly what has happened, that good policy making and the integrity of our legal system are under attack because of internal political quarrelling in the Conservative Party.
This is a real problem. This is a suggestion for a way to solve it. Now, this isn't pure politics, it's worrying about thousands of people coming across the channel.
Well, the proposal is not going to solve the problem. Being optimistic from the government's viewpoint, about 200 people might be sent to Rwanda, probably fewer than that. It's not going to solve a much bigger problem. It has become an extremely expensive way of dealing with a number of refugees, a small number, who could far better be dealt with under conventional principles.
Yes, says the Prime Minister, but it's a deterrent. He doesn't claim that everyone who comes across the sea will end up in Rwanda. What he does say is it's a signal that if you try the journey, you're not only risking your life, you're not only wasting your money, you might end up somewhere you don't want to be. And the argument he makes is that works in Australia to some extent. The idea of deterrence works in Greece as well. Isn't an elected government entitled to give it its best shot?
Well, it's entitled to give it its best legitimate shot, but it's not working as a deterrent. We saw last week in the depths of winter people getting into tiny boats and dying in very cold weather, in a very cold sea, because they had not been deterred by the British government's policy. And other governments in Europe are not following the same policy. We should be talking obviously much more to the French and to other European governments to try and produce a resolution to this problem. But there are other resolutions, including, subject to the discretion of the late Chief Justice, deploying a large number of additional judges to deal with the backlog, something that should have been done long ago.
Yet, Lord Carlisle isn't the reason it doesn't work as a deterrent. It can point out to people like you, it's down to lawyers who are frustrating what the government wants to do. It is down to the House of Lords, which you say they're going to thwart the policy. Your last few answers were absolutely clear, precisely what they're going to do.
Well, if you want to blame someone, you can always blame the lawyers, but the lawyers on the whole do not accept that. What we are doing is trying to countermand meddling by politicians in the law. This has not been the judges meddling in politics, rather it's been government elevating itself to an unacceptable level above the law, above our much-admired Supreme Court, and above the reputation for integrity internationally of United Kingdom law. And
Oh, that's stupid. Oh, that's stupid.
啊？问到了，问到了。Bob Markle.
Yes, there are other examples we can use. We've seen in various other countries the damage that's done when governments use perceived and often ill-judged political imperatives to place themselves above the cause. This is a step towards totalitarianism and an attitude the United Kingdom usually deprecates. And I think you'll find that in the House of Lords, not everybody, but many of the lawyers in the House of Lords will say this is a step too far. This is illegitimate interference by politics in the law on an issue that can be solved in other ways. And let's face it, Rishi Sunak tried to stop this bill himself from on stage because he knows it's a very bad bill.
You say it's a step to totalitarianism. It's an extraordinarily strong thing to say when the bill as it is now, rather than as it might have been to be amended by the rebels on the right of the Took Party, does allow individual appeals to the court, does allow appeals to the Supreme Court, does allow appeals to Strasbourg too. That is a totalitarianism.
Well, if you read, for example, a well-considered article about this in the Times this morning, you'll see that very few people will be able to take their cases to the courts, that resources for challenge will be limited, and that the law is being reduced in its importance to a level which is not appropriate for issues of this kind. There are much better ways of dealing with this problem. This will not stop illegal immigration.
Look, Anna, thank you very much indeed. Interesting, Emerald, that as this is discussed, there are some people saying nowhere else is considering such a scheme. The Danish were thinking, the Danish government, of sending their asylum seekers to Rwanda. They've suspended those talks while they try to find an EU deal. But the whole conversation about what to do, about people cross the seas or cross the Balkans, and we're here again with the program. It's a very high thing.
Yeah, I think beyond Europe, as you said, mentioned Australia, which is international examples. Nick, thank you for now. It is 16 minutes past 8. There is a deeply harrowing sunset.
좀 mercy. 누가 돼서? As a Beetle Man. Huh? Okay.
go to the family home, to knock on the door, if they don't do that, force entry, because that's the only role that the police play given their capacity to do that. So obviously we need to look at why that didn't happen, but as you said right at the outset, it's a tough job being a social worker and a police officer, and we must be careful not to make it just to point the finger of blame. What happened against the time.
Sorry to interrupt, I'm very keen to go back to the state to talk. Just before I do that, let me bring in and just from what you've read about this awful story, you're sort of saying question, what if anything, mindful as we are of those caveats, what if anything can be observed about the general situation, the general issues in the sector, specifics of this case?
Well, I think you're right to set out the basis of our discussion here, and then the right things. Clearly, this is devastating and sad in our thoughts with Rose and Granton himself and his family. There will be more questions answered, I think, for the reviews that are taking place. That's right. The heart of this is how we respond to children that we know are very vulnerable. And there's two things. How did the state respond at this point? Did everyone have a shared understanding of what a vulnerable child was at that stage, and a shared understanding of what the response was, i.e. did the police agree with social services that this was a priority case? But there is something, of course, bigger than this, in terms of the bigger picture, is that we know that children's services, and you've heard me talk about this before, children's services are absolutely stretched their limits in terms of the huge increase in demand, but also the resources that are very, very strained, and ultimately getting them to do very, very difficult jobs, leaving far too much, the system is leaving far too much at crisis point, and there isn't that help early on to work alongside families, which, we might find could have been what would have helped dramatically here.
But if I may add, and then I'll come back to you on this point, Zoe, you mentioned there children's services and they're stretched financially. Police services, I'm sure the police tell you on a daily basis, they certainly tell others, including this programme, that they are stretched financially. Isn't there a limit to what the state can do? And isn't there a fundamental point here that when you have a child who presumably is making, it's a dreadful case, but presumably making noise because they're hungry at 2 years old, isn't there a reasonable expectation that in most communities you would hope that neighbours, that family, others would intervene before the state has to get busy? So this is not just about funding and the state, this is also about something at the neighbourhood level.
Yeah, of course, and we all live in our communities, and we hope that our communities will be here for us, and be able to step in if something's very wrong, but we don't know what happened here necessarily, and it may be that there was no one to actually hear that or step in. My point really is to say it's not just a case of money, it's a case of what you do with that money, and now we're in this kind of really damaging cycle where more and more money is being spent on fewer children at higher and higher costs, and that's only going one way, and it's not sustainable. What we need to do is reset the system towards working with families earlier, and that's what the outcome of the government's own commission's review said by Josh McAllister 2 years ago. It isn't that this is sustainable. We're just going to get more children who are going to need help at crisis point unless we start investing early on when families and children first need that help.
So, Billingham, would you go along with that?
Yeah, I think you're raising a really fundamental point, Emily. What is all of our role in society? We have this like bystander mentality, don't we? At the moment, we see this people taking videos of extraordinary things happening on our streets, when actually you're wondering, well, why aren't you intervening? So it's really important that the police and social care galvanise the support of the public and making sure that they step forward in cases like this where there may be warning signs. But ultimately, Anne's right, the state needs to be in a position where it can respond well. And there's fracture lines and faults in what we call multi-agency working, so joint working between the police and social care. And that's been going on for decades. It's just not good enough. We know what needs to happen. We need to put police and social workers together in a room, have open access to each other's information, share all of their intelligence, make decisions, understand the family circumstances,
turn left. Do, do, do. Come on.
So Billy and Anne, thank you very much. 24 minutes past 8. First came the news of the Princess of Wales was in hospital, having had abdominal surgery and will be there for some time. Then the news that the King also needed an operation on an enlarged prostate. They were what the Daily Mail calls on its front page date, royal on the shelves. Others said, royals are like us, royals. The palace now understands.
对齐5分钟
Perhaps the need for transparency. Transparency which was on full display in a fascinating ebook which produced a slew of stories written by Robert Coleman of the Mail and author Charles III.
你冇詞細條片
Inside story. Welcome to join us once again. Morning to you, Robert. Good morning. Let's begin with the health before we turn to some of the stories in the book. Are we being told a lot more than we would have been in the past? Would you say why today?
Yes, I think we've been given more detail. I mean, it's obviously quite unusual to royal family issues or politics on the same day, but yeah, there's clearly a decision moved to get these things out there, and I thought it was very interesting that in both cases, there was a greater degree of detail than I've received in the past, for the very simple reason that
SideBB OK 嘛哥哥
he wants it out there.
SideBB OK
Because he believes, this is something other people ought to get checked up. There's a sense of, I'm not going to hide this.
Stop breathing. Mama, he has no pulse. He has no pulse.
你有冇 no pulse SideBB 梗係有 pulse
Yeah, I mean, there always was a sort of tiny
He's dead.
你係 dead 哥
It's alive for a procedure, or in very rare cases such as when the late Queen had COVID. And they're also private individuals. I mean, there's no reason why you have a right to know lots of details. But I think what the important thing here is obviously they're going to miss engagement. So they're going to miss and that means letting
the
Queen was standing there waiting for the Queen to open the new Emirates Stadium for Arsenal Football Club, and suddenly she was taken ill very unexpectedly and couldn't come. Everyone was mortified, and she was very conscious, she'd let people down. And a few weeks later, they were all invited round to tea at the palace. So, if events have to be cancelled, they will be resolved.
So is any event worth cancelling if it's actually No, I mentioned openness, I mentioned your book.
我冇車喺度，我去拍。
Insight into that very intimate, personal moment when the late Queen died. You revealed the memo that was written by the man who'd been at her side for so long.
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky to talk
elections coming up, Sunni as a nuclear bomb. You were to advise that actually, for the most part, despite that sort of sectarian difference, relations between these two very powerful countries have mostly been cordial, and this is not about an escalation in that bigger rivalry. It's about, as you say, sort of a local terror issue.
It is, and the two countries have a complicated relationship, but they've always got along and managed that relationship perfectly well. And there's nothing that has really changed that. But again, on the Pakistani side, with the strikes having been tied into their territory, I can see that domestically it could be quite difficult not to be seen to be responding in some way. There's an issue of national pride there and domestic politics as well. So it would seem that having done that on both sides of them, say that one was satisfied.
What's a good Iran policy look like for the Foreign Office right now?
Well, that's a very big question. I no longer work for the Foreign Office.
Sure, but you've been advised. You answer that question. You used to answer that question. What do you answer now?
I mean, Iran is a serious threat. In some ways, growing threat. The nuclear threat hasn't gone away, and regional behaviour has obviously been exacerbated recently, and there's a wider threat against even people in this country. So I think we need to be very, very alert to that, and make sure we're working closely with allies to contain that threat and to show deterrence.
Ambassador to the Republic of Iran 2018. Thank you so much for joining us. 19 minutes to 9. We've heard a lot on the programme about the plight of people stuck in Gaza, unable to escape the bombing that followed Hamas's attacks on Israel. One of those with family still in Gaza is the First Minister of Scotland, Hunter Youssef. His wife's brother is a doctor working there, and he's still there, so none of us in the family were able to escape and to return home. I've been speaking to Yusuf here in Glasgow about that experience and a difficult first year in his job, my Political Thinking podcast. It's been difficult politically as well as personally, as he and his party are still wrestling with the fallout of the police investigation into the SNP finances, which saw the party's former leader Nicola Sturgeon and her husband Peter Murrell, chief executive of the SNP, arrested and then released without charge. Humza Yusuf told me about those difficult, painful days after October 7th and the fear he and his wife still live with. I'll be frank. Before Pizza, my mother-in-law and father-in-law in Gaza told me the lowest points of my life, and Nadia's life. They were really difficult days, precisely because day by day, night by night, there were no and I can remember the time at the SNP conference, in the midst of all of this, my first conference as party leader, trying to concentrate on what I have to deliver to the party and members. When I get a call, just first day of the conference, first night of the conference, my mother-in-law saying that their neighbour has been told that they're about to get hit to evacuate. So of course the whole neighbourhood, because of the impact of that strike that they're worried about, the whole neighbourhood is wandering the streets. Now, it turned out that that was a false message. I'll never forget what she said to me. She said to me, "You take care of my girls." And for me that was really tough. And she thought, you thought that was done last. That was it. She was wanting to say her advice. And I thought, how do I respond to that? And still, amidst the some of the family, because the family felt it's a very painful choice to make. Some could escape, others are still stuck. You know, when my father-in-law arrived back, he is the alpha male of the alpha males. You know, it's his way of being. And I've never heard him, I've seen him come close to shedding a tear. But he absolutely broke down when he was explaining to me the fact that he had to say goodbye to his son and his mother. He said, "Now that's your wife, sister, who's a doctor." Wife's mother, yeah. Wife's mother who's there, who's a doctor, works in a hospital in Khan Yunis. And his mother, who's 93, and he just doesn't know to this day whether he'll see them again. You said how difficult it was being the SNP party couple George Show premature at the time. Constant interviews, constant people talking to you. Was it difficult to do the job when that was happening? And of course it was difficult for me, and that's where I'm so grateful to the team. Many of them would step in and say, "Let me do the event." We had to make sure there was never any question of the conferences or the job, and that's an issue for controls. And I'm not against 100% the right to do it. You have been much more masculine so for a fiscal when you've been in the opposition in Westminster. And you've talked about the military tantamount and it was wrong. So that's what I said. And what I said was the statements from 7 senior members of the government, the National Security Minister, the Finance Minister, the many statements that are saying Gazans should be resettled, and in Gaza there should be Israeli settlements. That's the textbook. Every textbook is wrong. If someone's allowed to listen one ethnic minority should be moved through and another ethnic minority should be accepted. There can't be any argument. That's my concern. That doesn't mean that but we have some extreme elements saying Gaza's government that want that to be the end game. We must resist that by saying that the land of Gaza belongs to the people of Gaza. We don't have much provocation from the leaders who use what we're saying genocide. So that would be for the message we use. And I think that's as you look at as you go on, it says what we're saying is don't stop genocide in the and that is responsible for this. And I think what past the time I think husbands speak for wives have to explain what it is that their wives say. Nadia speaks for herself. She speaks for herself. She's for herself. I said, why not talk about that? Well, I think what it's for me to be there is to respect the traditional law to say, right,
course in history, it's a take when you probably figured out that that's how it's nice to some service English and support the SAP. And the fact teaching about maths, you know, more about maths and everything is the same. I don't know, you guys join the SAP. And that's an assumption that it's like one country. You don't realise that there's a part of one country. And for how you just most of the parts of the world, nationalism is obviously in a very different way. It's a kind of hostile tolerance, aggressive look at, after all, at the region that your father came from. Nationalism in Pakistan, nationalism in India now, is very destructive, very dangerous arguably. I think that's right. And that's why I don't make the comparisons lightly. I should be very clear about that. I don't make comparisons between what happened in partition and that's very obvious point to make the one of the ethnics. I've never really been confident in the fact that we have national in our party's name, not because the founding members of the SNP had any far right inclination. We certainly didn't know any nationalist inclination in the way that you express it there, but because it can be misinterpreted. But we are the Scottish National Party. We have a very strong brand, very strong identity, but we've worked really hard to make it really clear, and I think this now is well understood, that we're a civic national party, we're a party that believes it doesn't matter really where you come from. What's important is where we go together, and there's no doubt about our politics being very rooted in the left, the centre left of political discourse. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the hurdles we've got around the country. One you're going to tell me is not for you, it's for the police. Just briefly, on this police investigation, are people entitled to know the outcome of that before they get to the ballot? Because that would be interfering in the police investigation. The police have to conclude that investigation at a certain time scale. I can't do that. I'm going to let the police do what they've got to do at the time that they've got to do. I suppose it's fair to say, I think, I'm not going to treat your listeners as fools. The police investigation has been one of the most difficult times for the party. There's no ifs or buts or maybes about it, and there has clearly been an impact in terms of how we're perceived by the public and issues of trust. And I've got to work hard, as I hope I have been doing in the last 10 months. I've got to work hard to make sure that people know whatever the outcome of that police investigation is that the SNP is a party they can trust. But it's been difficult, no doubt, for those involved. Whatever happens in that police investigation, I've got a job to do to make sure that the SNP is a trusted party, and that's what I'll be doing from now until the general election and beyond. Humza Yousaf, the First Minister of Scotland, talking to me here in Glasgow for the first in a new series of Political Thinking. You can hear the whole of that interview, it's around 40 minutes, I think, on BBC Sounds now. The idea of political thinking, you don't know, it is a conversation with rather than an interrogation of the people who shape our political thinking. And you can get it wherever you get your podcast. We've got over 6 years worth of interviews now with Prime Ministers, party leaders, campaigners, decision makers, sportsmen and many others.
It is 9 minutes to 9. For well over a decade now, economists and policymakers have ruminated on the causes of low productivity, the so-called productivity puzzle. In economic terms, productivity is the efficiency.
Spending on IT and things like that, in favor of covering up short-term pressures. But I don't think it's, but what a lot of people are saying is, well, this is what you get after 10 years of Tory austerity. But we got that under Labour peace as well, from 97 to 2010. There wasn't much difference. In the NHS, for example, in the last, since the pandemic, staffing is actually up by about, in hospitals, up by about 20%, yet we're doing roughly the same number of operations as we were in 2019. But that's, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, but that's a real problem. We are effectively, we are putting in, I think 20 or 30 billion pounds more a year, and getting kind of worse results for that money. And that's a huge issue. And I think capital is right. I think manpower is right. Adult social care is another area where absolutely the skills and training have been neglected, but also the basic average of our care homes. I think we stopped building care homes a couple of decades ago.
Kate Bell from the TUC, what would you do about improving hospitals?
Well, I think you've got to invest in equipment and you've got to invest in staff. And I think when you look at those problems with staff and what they're doing and where some of that money might be going, we are losing experienced staff because they're working so well. And that means West Bending, for example, around last year, I think around £350 on agency staff to cover people because their workload is so heavy. So I think you need that long-term workforce planning, but retention of staff, their training, their development, and it's hard, and that's what it is.
We just had an outbreak of harmony between the TUC and the CPS, which is value for the licence fee from the BBC for you. Kate and Robert, thank you both very much.
All that is to know now. The weather is harsh, snowy, and icy in the north of Scotland in particular. Tough for people, good it seems for Beluga whales. One made a rare appearance off the Shetlands. Here's Phil Harrison from Seabird Shetlands, always one of the few people to see it.
When we arrived at a sort of cliff-top view of this particular bay, we immediately spotted the beluga whale. It's a beautiful ivory white whale that just broke the surface just as we arrived. And you could also follow it below the surface. It's so white, this animal, you could actually see it below.
Glorious sight. Dr. Helen Scales is a marine biologist and writer who joins us now. How rare would it be, Dr. Scales, for belugas to turn up on our shores?
It's not unheard of. They have been seen in Shetland a couple of times in recent years. I think 21 there was one, and then back in 1997. So the occasional wandering migrant does make it down this far.
And sounds a glorious sight. The colour, the shape, is that designed to cope with the Arctic conditions in North?
Yeah, these are amazingly well adapted animals that have evolved to live all around the Arctic. They, that ivory white colour is really, really wonderful, and
quality. I grew up in a Mediterranean home, and the food that I was used to eating just didn't match the hummus that I was eating in the supermarket, and so I thought, well, should we maybe do a bit better than that? So, were you like Ottolenghi then, a chef, or were you an accomplished home cook, or what? You're young. Oh my God, it's kind of you to say. No, I was really young, and I was absolutely not a good chef at all. In fact, some of my old school friends would probably say that I was the worst cook they knew. I'm glad it's gotten better, but I think, and in fact, the first few times that I made the recipes, I was a computer engineer at the time and had a good career. My friends all said, look, don't do this. You've got a great job. You're settled. Don't go now rock the boat. But I felt like it was worth rocking and tried again and again. And I only knew that the recipes were right when, all my friends sat around the table and devoured the hummus and the falafel. And actually till today, whenever I do new products, that's precisely how I realize which are the winners, because a table full of people will tell me the truth or not to go for it. Same friends just telling me what not to eat and what not to launch and what to launch.
So take us back then. Here you are in your early 20s. You're what? Computer programming, you just said. You had a good career.
Engineer, yeah.
Yeah, and you're living in a one-bedroom flat in London. How did you go about then starting to make hummus in the hope of selling it on to other people?
So I did it at night. Once I had the recipes ready and I was selling, I sort of sold on the weekends in town in London. I had bowls of chickpeas around the flat soaking while I was at work, and then came back, prepared everything I needed, and inevitably woke up at 3 or 4 in the morning, made all the hummus fresh, and then delivered it on my way to work into Soho in Little Peugeot. I've got a whole technical team that would absolutely hate to hear this story, but the reality was it didn't get fresher than that. I would take my little Peugeot carpet in Soho, deliver it into the few restaurants that I was supplying, and deliver it in. I had a little good relationship with all the traffic wardens to say, please don't give me a ticket while I deliver in there.
You were young and gorgeous in those days, I'm assuming.
At least young and
yes, you're pretty gorgeous now, I've seen your pictures.
So it was all about relationship building.
Yes, they were putting in your hands, I can see it happening.
But it was, and my husband, thank God, was amenable to allowing me to have the tiny little flat turn into a tiny little manufacturing session every single morning. But, when you're young and in your 20s, these are things that you would do because you think, oh, well, I'm invincible, I can do this, I don't need all that sleep, and now I'm 45, I would do it again. But
I haven't pictured you living in this flat with all the soaking chickpeas with everybody else, but you were already married then, you were very young.
Yeah, and my husband was, and actually we had like packaging around the side of our bed, so I had to climb onto
climbed out of the bed from the front because I couldn't get to the side. It was full of plastic pots in plastic boxes, but still. So he was very, very patient, and eventually there was a freezer in the lounge, and it was a joint effort, I think.
Did you have a lot of rivals in those days? Because you're making on a small scale, you're selling into restaurants, you said beginning in Soho. Were there lots of companies trying to do the same thing?
I think there still is. There is an element of the ethnic market that has hummus and ethnic food manufacturing. It's not as well known and it's not branded, but it is well covered. There's no shortage of Mediterranean people in the country, and they are making a great product. I think I was a little bit more Western within that, so understood the culture in the UK, and even though I'm South African by nature,
I was trying to place your accent.
I'm South African.
You have Mediterranean, you said your parents, you're from a Mediterranean family. What do you mean by that?
So my father's Egyptian, grandparents Turkish, and so I absolutely grew up with this sort of food on a daily and weekly basis, abundant tables of food.
It's Middle Eastern, really, isn't it? That's why I said Ottolenghi.
Yeah, it is absolutely Middle Eastern, and I think nowadays you'll get it everywhere. The hummus is so covered by the Middle East and the Mediterranean countries. I think it fits so beautifully with tzatziki and tarama in Greece, and I think it lends itself to the same Mediterranean diet.
So you were saying that at the time there were lots of
frozen pizzas. Eventually, the business was bought by Dr. Utker, who still.
And you said that he was from Egypt,
yes,
and your mum was from
Bulgaria. So we are the United Nations, absolutely. So never a small meal on the table, and never a badly cooked one. But I started the business because a plumber's daughter becomes a plumber. When I wanted to go into food, that was what I had heard. And even till today, I often say this to my daughters, be careful that you don't just automatically want to go into business because that's what you hear in the house all the time. The truth is, that's what I grew up with. Those were the words, that was the concept of costings, P&L. It's what we grew up with.
Are you from a wealthy family?
No, originally I would joke that one of the big reasons that we feed a lot as a family is because my dad was so hungry. He had moved to South Africa and started it. By the time I was young, my dad had already done quite well, but not until much later. So I think a lot of our psyche is around feeding and making sure that everyone has an abundance of food around them.
What brought you to the UK?
I was a successful computer engineer in South Africa, but at the time, South Africa was going through a reversal of apartheid, which was absolutely the right thing to do. But had hurt my career a little bit as essentially a white engineer, and we needed to balance out the numbers of black engineers and white engineers, and I was all for it. I didn't really want to give up my career.
No, it's hard when it hits you. It's politically, you feel it's the right thing.
That's it. So I felt that it was time to move and grow my career, and just decided that the UK was the right place.
So where do you make this hummus now in this falafel?
We've got a small factory in Watford, just north of London, and it's making much more hummus than I think we ever expected it to be making. But it's a cute little factory, and it's amazingly efficient.
How many people do you employ?
There are around 30 of us now, which is amazing, but all very much a family and very much, it's a fun office to be in, although we do get a lot of work done. There's always a radio on. I'm sure they're listening now, embarrassed, hoping that I don't swear or do something embarrassing. But it is a very familial, and they're all my family.
In those early 70s, they had a whole, not far off, half a decade to build the reputation. Then what?
Well, of course, we had the oil crisis that happened in that mid-70s period, and all of a sudden those flights weren't so cheap anymore. So there was that point where a lot of these companies that had really expanded very rapidly suddenly found themselves in problems. It took until 1993 before we had those holiday protections we know of now that are associated with the package holiday. But in that case, there were people just literally being stranded abroad or losing their money when these companies went bust.
So we had the change in ownership in 1973. We almost fast forward a decade. To the early 80s, 1982, it was bought out by a group called International Leisure Group. Continued to do well at this point. became the generic name for all of these youth holidays. And I'm going to bring in Andy Tidy, who around this time in the early 80s joined the company. Andy, hello.
Hello.
Andy, you're a rep in 1983. Now, I don't want to underplay you at this point in time, not that being a rep should be underplaying you, but you did end up being, a couple of decades later, quite a bigwig in the whole business. You ran the whole shebang in 2001. So quite the rise. I heard a little bit earlier of sangria at breakfast and chanting about all kinds of things on beaches that have disturbed Sam's holidays over the years. Was that what it was like? What was the reputation of the business like?
So it wasn't particularly salacious. There were over 1 million people young people going away on it had gone out of fashion. Yeah. But they've done nothing with it potentially. Yeah. So what's the upset, to be honest?
You stayed in control of it. Would you have wanted to evolve the business into something else? Or do you think that the premise of it, the style of it, would still work and would have still worked if it had been continued to be supported?
Youth was fragmenting into a lot more sectors than it had been before. So our business plan, when we were doing the management buyout, it included all those different sectors of people, and they would have had different brand names other than Club 1830. So Club 1830 would have existed, but it would probably have been carrying about 60,000, I guess. But the business that we would have been running would have encompassed young people in other businesses.
Do they still have the same time capital though? Because my question around the business model would be how much money people have in that age bracket to spend on holidays. Because it sounds like the holiday itself might have been super fearful, but you're looking at people spending a significant amount of money on those entertainment factors, which is where your margin is.
Even in years when there was a recession or when unemployment was high, it didn't really affect the numbers very much.
So it was 2018 that Thomas Cook said, due to changing consumer tastes, they were going to consider selling and selling up. Later that year, they then said they were going to pitch the brand the last flight. You might be on this sort of a nice peaceful holiday. Sam, at the time, left Manchester on October the 27th. I'm going to check your diary off to Magaluf, New York. Costed £618. Yeah, there we go. That was the very last Club 1830 flight. So just hearing there, the son's travellers, hearing there about the business changing hands, different people in charge, how it might have been impacted, and those consumer tastes changing. Was there something that was just not sustainable about what 18 to 30s was anyway?
I think what it represented and what people knew it for, that sort of idea of going away on a cheap holiday, drinking yourself into oblivion and then, going out partying, had changed. And obviously social media became a really important driver, and it still remains, of course, to this day, very important, particularly for travel businesses. We now have this Instagram generation who wanted a different thing from their holidays. They wanted to sort of emulate what they were seeing on social media, particularly on Instagram at the time. And people going away for experiences, going away for cultural enrichment, and quite a little bit of time before Club 1830 was finally closed down. They had Lost Cooks Club, which was more for this millennial generation, and more about experiences and food, nice rooms, and seafood washed images of the lovely hotels they had. They had started that, and they actually still remain to this day. They were sold off separately, and Cooks Club still exists in that sense.
Andy, Lisa, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us on Toast and laying out what has happened to Club 18 to 30 over so many decades. Sam, I'm fascinated to get into this bit. There seems to me to be quite a few different things that have been going on with Club 18 to 30.
This idea of focusing the whole holiday on getting drunk is where I think it ultimately would.
A little mystic. You know what the best sound in the world is? For audio, for Radio 4 listeners, is the crunching of a biscuit.
So there you have it. Open country, in the snow.
Are you ready to run it?
dog. It's also pretty dark. The thing about the head torches is it blinds people. I'm sort of aware I've got to keep looking away from you all the time. So where are we going? We're doing 4 Munros. Munros are hills in Scotland above 3,000 foot, of which there are 282 of them. And the 4 that we are doing today, through the Muck and through the Goling, we can see the first one, which is Carmen Turk. From there we head in a clockwise direction before we finish eventually on a hill called Glassmill, which is the highest of the 4 today. But this is quite a well-known circuit. Although, having said that, on a day like today, I wouldn't expect to see many people, so it should be a fairly quiet walk. That was Ian describing the route, which starts about an hour north of Dundee, past the snow gates of the A93, the highest road in the UK. This was Mabel, another producer.
Right, we're right in the vlog. I'm carrying my kit.
Just a dog slaughter. Dog slaughter. Mabel will do the wrong thing. You only have dogs on leash if you see livestock, sheep or so. So as soon as you see a dog, Mabel will be on the leash. Imagine people flapping in the birds, but she doesn't even pay attention to that anymore. She'll just sit on my place and chat away.
Can't really see it.
around the snow and say, under feet, so nothing will happen at the start. But I did explain this in a mind to investigate it myself, and dogs have an incredibly efficient blood transfer system. I mean, you can see the wolves in Yellowstone bounding through the snow. You need to get some boots on there. You need to get some boots on the feet. What you've got to look out for sometimes is balling in the between pads, really wet snow can fall. But it's never happened with dogs and little Labradors. They've got webbed feet, which kind of like acts as, you see the bottom of crampons, they've got these little bubbles that will knock off the snow. So they've never had the balling of the snow. You don't need boots on them. I think if you're in -30 in Yellowknife in Canada and you've got the grit on the road, then even then, dogs, they're very tough. They're not feet, they're not humans. The noises are more about food. The noises are about food and general anxiety, but what's going on? It's a tough time. It's a tough time, but mostly it's for food. Another biscuit there. Okay, nice. One more biscuit. I mean, I've got to ration these out because we've done about 200 metres of climbing, and that's your fourth, is it? But it is your birthday, so.
In the distance, on the horizon, just as the sun was creeping over the top of the horizon, there was 4 stags peering down at us. They're probably having a look. They probably smelt Mabel and thought, what's this here? So they just had a little look, decided that there was nothing. There was nothing too dangerous there, so they just continued with their munch on the grass and got on their merry way. And a lot of grouse. I don't think I've seen so many grouse certainly for a long time. I've tried to keep count. I'm up to about 25, 26 so far, so good numbers. So, yeah, I just like to hang about.
I get, even though I spend almost every mountain I've done has been in winter, I only go up into mountains in the winter, but I do get cold quite quickly. Cold fingertips. If I take gloves off to take a photo or a video of dogs for some reason, if you go up to the marble white, it takes me ages to get them back. My God, it hurts when they come back to life. It's good fun, isn't it? Keeps snowing, so it's super. It snows, is it? You spotted something.
I'm here, but it's edges to it's about 30 centimetres below the surface of the snow. They've obviously just dug themselves out. And you see there, actually, so I suppose when they're foraging for the day, they'll retire in there. Tonight, rest of their pals. You see how insulated that would be, though, because it's a pretty hostile environment here, or could be. Let's have a sniff as well, so you can smell something. Is that a hole into the ground, or just amongst the stones? Amongst the stones. You'll just find a little nook, nest between them, make a nice little bed down, and then play up. Why do they turn on? What makes them turn on? The trigger is light, so when it starts to get darker evenings, and the weather starts to turn, it gets a bit cooler, that's when you start to see the slight variation in colour, and then a steady progression up to about this time of the year. There's still a trace of a summer coat, but the winter coat is very evident now, and from I suppose the next 4 weeks it'll turn completely white. And then it's much more difficult to see. Yes, the white coat is obviously a very good defence mechanism from predation, both from foxes and from eagles, and historically it would have been lynx and bear as well in this territory. So, and just as we're saying that, there's a blue here, mountain here has appeared just off to the left. It's just sitting having a little look at us. It's wondering who these strange people are holding microphones on the side of the Scottish Hill. Hey, surprisingly big. This is quite soft snow we're on, it's quite hard going walking across it. When you see the ear prints, there's this nice wide footprint which distribute the weight, which means it's able to scurry across the snow quicker to escape. So there's just ahead of us, lots of them today, and the sun is now starting to make an appearance as well. What a day. Together. Have you been up here before?
I've not done this one, no. No, I haven't, so Ian's very graciously been my one that he's been up. So, no, it's new to me, but I know the area well. Looking across to the third of our Foreland last mile at the moment, the cloud is just wispy cloud, it's beautiful blue sky behind me.
Place from which people rarely return, he says, and And it's an occasion really to take stock of that time, but also to take stock of the present, and the present for him is London. It's really the place that he's tried to make a home for some time.
He arrives first not London, but Edinburgh University in the late 1980s. And we see there the control of the Gaddafi regime exerted over moving overseas. So when Khaled meets Mustafa, who's one of the friends of his wife, and the other Libyan students, they have to perform this kind of dance before they can really allow themselves to open up to one another. And it made me think, like, or wonder that under these conditions, friendship become an even more precious commodity.
Most of us are lucky enough to have friendships that last a lifetime, notwithstanding how fragile this friendship is. So I think oftentimes in dealing with friendship, we also testing the possibilities that might occur. But with these characters, Joyce, their sense, it's part of the government coalition. In those days, with these friendships, the joke was people who either go to read or to write, go to class, even if they are serious students, or you go to write reports about everyone else for the government. And then there's the majority, the happy, indifferent majority that's there neither to read nor to write, just have a good time. And my characters must have found family, some friends there. They really genuinely wanted to share passion for fiction.
So they go all sorts of, Mustafa, I guess, leads the way in having a passion for protesting. And Princess Khaled to come to London where they've been protesting university students back in and at this point they're listening to the passage starts us out.
We began to stir, coiling within our own mouths. Mustafa took his hand off my back and left it tightly on my feet, just above the elbow. We began to steer through the vessel's prow. When I looked back to him, his eyes were unrecognizable. Bodies pressed against me from all sides. They smelled familiar. Their mothers, too, for it seemed, had placed small bottles of orange blossom and frankincense in their suitcases. Like these, they were all disliked the old-fashioned scents and never used them. But, also out of love and longing for their mothers, they had buried the perfumes deep underneath their clothes in the wardrobe, where slowly their scent trembled in the garments and the air around them. The three men were now standing immediately behind the window pane, egging one another on. Whatever it was that they were discussing had turned into a dare. They faced us. One of them tried to open the sash window, but it would not budge. Another had a go, and the lower panel came up and moved its sides and stood open. He yanked out and shouted for it to make it home. One of them that disappeared returned carrying something black on it. It was only after this kind of heightened political danger. This question has, of course, other implications. So I found them very interesting because they were so genuinely lovely. They really have such passion for one another, yet their ability to trust another fully is always compromised. And so that question of knowing what's really in your chest becomes urgent.
He's someone who does find solace and excitement and inspiration in literature. He has a love of Virginia Woolf and Joseph Conrad, and in particular Robert Louis Stevenson, and he sees literature as a great river where the links between these very disparate writers outweigh their differences. Are his opinions on this close to your own?
Yes. I think that all these demarcations, literature by language, by periods, by genre, they are decorative. I think that everything is our inheritance, and I benefited from that. Benefited from entering the Russian book not as a Russian book, but as a book written by one of my brothers or sisters. That's how I read into their work. And Khalid, for him, these writers are really friends also. Those books are friends. In his list of companionship, the books are very, very prominent. The books and London.
And outside of them, and outside of the people who were at St James's Square that day, your own family is very close to this story of protest and exile and fear. Your father, the prominent journalist and activist Jabal al-Matar, was abducted in Egypt in 1919. He was never found. And you describe your search for him in your memoir, The Return. Did writing that book kind of